Welcome to the voice chat. Thank dog it's Friday. I've been waiting all week to say that. These calls are recorded for uploading to social media, and by joining a call, you're consenting to being recorded. Anyone wishing to join a call should email me at animaluncontrol@gmail.com, and I will reply with instructions. Today's topic, dogs as brood parasites. Joining me are Esha and Sheepie to discuss the topic. So, Sheepie, this is more or less your show. So, why don't you take it away?
All right, awesome. Thank you. And I definitely want to get your guys' input on this too. I think it's such an interesting topic for discussion. So, I also want to start by saying I can't take full credit for this theory, obviously. I was introduced to the idea on the dog free subreddit. There were a couple of users that have posted ideas along these lines, and I just got fascinated by it. So I started doing my own reading and thinking on the topic. So shout out to the dog free subreddit for for this idea. And I think I'd like to start by just introducing the idea of what a brood parasite is. And I think we're all pretty familiar with the concept. So the most famous example would be the cuckoo bird, which is where the distasteful uh, cuck comes from, and essentially it's it's a bird species that lays its egg in the nest of a different bird species, and it has evolved so that its hatchling will like hatch first. Like it has a shorter, I think, gestation or whatever you want to call it in birds. So by the time the unsuspecting mother is coming back to her nest to feed what she thinks is her offspring, it's actually the cuckoo bird's offspring. And it has also evolved to like cry out louder and have a larger, more colorful mouth and things like that. So it really heavily preys upon the instinct of that bird to feed its young. In addition to that, it will also kick the other eggs and hatchlings out of the nest, like killing the real uh, offspring of the unsuspecting mother. So that's kind of a rundown of how brood parasitism works. There's several bird species and a lot of insect species. There's some species of solitary bee that does a similar thing by laying its egg in the hive or whatever the in the hive of a different species of bee. It lays its eggs, and then that species will start raising the intruder's offspring. So that's kind of the premise. Um, and so how do dogs act as a parasite on our society is the question. And do they? And actually, there is some research I have here and some articles that will explain. So, do you guys have any questions or comments before we get into the articles that I was going to cover?
Um, well, I was just going to run my big mouth for a moment, as I normally do. So, a brood parasite, sort of in the abstract, it's interesting. So, it's a species of animal that relies on others to raise their young. But in addition to that, it also does it at the expense of the other young, because that was interesting what you just said. Like the cuckoo bird will not only leave its eggs in the nest of the other bird species, will kick out the eggs of that other bird. If I heard that correct.
Yes, that's correct.
So
Yep.
so basically, so it's not just, well, I'll have this sparrow family raise my kid, but I will basically essentially kill the other, children of that sparrow family, for lack of a better word. Interesting stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It is uh it's really an interesting niche that some of these different species have evolved to basically be deadbeat mothers. I've heard them described as the deadbeat moms of the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to start here. I have in front of me an article from 2018, actually, in the San Diego Union Tribune. And the title here is Let's Be Honest, America, Dogs Are Parasites, Not Man's Best Friend. It's
Oh
hard to
God,
imagine such a thing
more.
being
It's like
published.
it's more fascist hate speech. There we go. All right. Well, let's
You know,
hear it.
interestingly, I didn't print it out, but there was they printed after this like an article like almost an apology because they got so much hate from this article.
Oh, really? I
So,
find that
yes,
surprising.
maybe we could cover that some other time.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just am going to read not the entire article, but a few excerpts that I thought were pertinent. So, first up, a statistic that Americans spending on their pets more than quadrupled. And when they say pets, we know usually they're referring mostly to
Right.
dogs, right? Like
Right.
they use the term pets. Uh, More than quadrupled from 1994 to 2017, going from 17 billion to 69.5 billion dollars.
Wow.
So, and it says, of course, people have reasons for showing their dogs such love. A 2015 story in Wired magazine detailed the considerable research showing that humans care more about their pets than other humans. I have that
Mm-hmm.
article here as well. Um, and it included the statistic 40% of married female dog owners reported that they received more emotional support from their pet than from their husband or children. So that's odd. We can come back to that. But here's where it starts to get interesting. The article continues. The more the human canine relationship is examined, the more its parasitic nature becomes obvious, and the more clingy and forlorn humans come to appear. So, beginning with extensive research into dog evolution in the 90s, one of America's best science journalists, Stephen Budiansky, wrote in the cover article for The Atlantic magazine, in an article entitled The Truth About Dogs, which I have here also. It's kind of the meat that we're going to get into. But the conventional explanation of where dogs come from, how they ended up in our homes, and why they do what they do are basically all wrong. So, instead of the notion that over the past 40,000 years mankind domesticated wolves into present day dogs, Budiansky says the evidence strongly suggests that, quote, proto dogs cultivated mankind, intuitively grasping that, quote, mooching off people beat fighting it out in the wild. And this theory, I think, really sounds a lot more believable to me based on the way we observe dogs behaving today. I mean, we're all like very conscious and aware of the fact that dogs are constantly begging for food, stealing food off tables, are being trained because of their food driven nature. So, it continues. Early humans with their campfires and garbage heaps and hunting practices, but above all their social interactions, represented an ecological niche ripe for exploitation. And dogs had a secret weapon in winning over humans, which is human nature's near compulsive anthropomorphism. So the theory basically is that human beings are so driven to attribute uh, human like intent to even inanimate objects or things like the weather, that dogs learned to exploit this weakness in humankind, and over, I guess, co-evolving with us for, tens of thousands of years, they just filled this ecological niche, thus becoming at least a social parasite, if not a brood parasite. So I'll pause there, if you guys have anything to add or any more questions or comments.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to say that was a great introduction. And that's what the articles. I think it was two articles you brought up, correct?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, those are really great. So I'm learning a lot already, and I've been taking notes so that way I have something to contribute. So, Animal on Control, AU, if you want to say something. I'll let you
Yeah,
go.
I mean, I have a few thoughts on the issue. Yeah, it's a very interesting anthropological take on the issue. Um, yeah, I don't know if like really anybody has, critique the, like I said, the anthropological theses in play here. But I mean, yeah, I mean, dogs and humans have been, I mean, maybe not every tribe of humans necessarily, but at least many of them, have existed in the same space for a long time. And here's my theory. I don't know if it necessarily fits into the brood parasite theory, but this is just a thought that I had. Again, we've been sharing the same spaces for a long time. And the thing is that like dog nutters, dog cultists are going to attribute the success of the human race on Earth to that. In fact, I've heard them say that dogs have guided human evolution, which I think is basically it's their dog religion creation theory. But I think it's more likely, and it kind of, definitely fits in, Sheepy, with what you just said. Is like we've shared space for a long time, and long enough that evolutionary pressure would be put upon them, right? So we have over that time, for example, like dogs that knew how to appeal to, sort of the altruistic or parental or just general good nature of humans would be more likely to get resources, food, shelter, protection. And over those thousands of years, it sort of put a evolutionary pressure on them, so to speak. Um, and that's how that's how they've managed to, survive and become such a, component of our space. Now, I'm not meaning to compliment dogs in any way. It goes to the parasitical nature that basically they're sort of feeding off of our good nature to, get those resources. And that has actually helped the dogs evolve into what they are, for better
Yes,
or worse, right? If that makes sense.
precisely.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's a perfect segue to read you the last couple of lines in the first article I just went over, which says, "When it comes to dogs, almost nothing is what it seems." So is that love in your dog's eyes, or is that the look of a con man sizing up his mark? Science says it's the latter. Sorry, world.
Well, I wouldn't like, I mean, butt back in. I wouldn't give the dogs too much agency. In other words, it's probably not a conscious. It's more, like I said, it's more like evolution, right? It's genetic more than intellectual or somehow learn, actually, like real world learned behavior, right? I mean, it's over the generation. Think about it, a generation for a dog is only a year. So if you're talking 20,000 years of human history, that's 20,000 generations
Yes,
that,
exactly.
they're basically that they've been able to. So basically, it's interesting because, obviously we've guided dog evolution deliberately, like via like intentional line breeding, like pit bulls, like fighting dogs that not evolve in nature, right? They were created by, selective breeding for a specific use case. But I think what's being discussed here is it's not really intentional. It's almost the same kind of thing, but it isn't, because again, it's just it's I don't want to say it's natural evolution, but it's evolution sort of wrought just from the indirectly from the day-to-day interactions between dogs and humans. That makes any sense.
Yeah, that's pretty much, I think, the theory here. So it's like humans have an inability almost to not attribute conscious thought to these animals. I think that's discussed in a lot of these articles, but it's like the main weakness of humanity is our humanity. In a way, like we like to think that there is something more going on behind the dog's behavior than just genetics. But science is showing, and these articles, it's bizarre because even as I read articles about dogs are a parasite, the truth about dogs, they still conclude like, oh, but cute fuzzy wuzzy like is such a boon to humanity for some reason. Like it's just bizarre that even when discussing dog genetics and these lineages and breeding and things like that, people still have this soft spot. And I think it's just that soft spot is what has allowed dogs to exploit us so much. So,
Absolutely, I agree.
okay, I want to now get into this Atlantic article because it's really fascinating and a little surprising that it was published. I don't know that something like this would be published in something like the Atlantic today. I feel like dog culture in the last, decade has gotten much crazier. So this is from July of 1999. It's written by Stephen Budiansky, who then also turned this article into an entire book, which I have but have not finished yet. I didn't get it in time to go through the entire book, but the article's enough. So, recent explorations into the field of canine genetics are changing the way we think about man's best friend. Man's best parasite may be more like it and could help us repair the damage done by a century of inbreeding. So I don't really care about that last part. I don't care about undoing the damage of other than maybe like banning dogs, but um so the article begins by saying that if biologists weren't victims of the same blindness that afflicts all of us, they would not hesitate to classify dogs as social parasites. The class of manipulative creatures exemplified by the cuckoo, which we discussed earlier, lays its eggs in the nest of some poor, unsuspecting dupe of a bird of another species. The befuddled parents see a big mouth crying out for food and stuff it full of worms at the expense of their own offspring. Every time they turn their backs, the cuckoo hatchling shoves another of their own flesh and blood overboard, and the parents never seem to notice.
Wow.
Yeah, so he goes on to say that dogs have not quite reached that point in their parasitism of human society. I kind of disagree, but it is sobering that the number one behavioral problem that drives dog owners to seek professional help is aggression, and canine aggression most often is directed at children. So that's how the article starts, and that's kind of how I started looking at dogs as brood parasites or aka like social parasites. They really have managed to hijack human nature and especially maternal instincts or even maybe paternal instincts and redirect those instincts into the care of dog,
Yep.
which I
Mhm.
think basically fits the definition. I mean, like I'm not a scientist, obviously, I'm not a researcher. This is an interesting topic to theorize and discuss. But, here even, we have scientific articles or scientific research showing that dog evolution is not what we have, I guess, conventionally been led to believe. Okay, so moving on into canine genetics. He basically goes through how canine genetics have been increasingly more, I guess, studied and funded, interestingly, by like the kennel clubs and societies, because there's so many genetic issues in these pure, I guess, lines of dog breeds, that they wanted to try to figure out if they could find the genes causing that. So in the process of doing that research, they ended up finding that the standard myth about the origin of dogs is that man found him to be a useful companion and took him in, such as being shepherds or sentinels that helped them hunt. The oldest archaeological evidence of dogs with a morphology distinct from that of wolves is from around 12,000 years ago in the Middle East. However, the genetic evidence flatly contradicts the view that dogs came about at the same time that human beings settled down. So there was further research from an evolutionary biologist at the University of California, and he found essentially through looking at the maternal DNA that there was almost no selective breeding going on for most of uh, the 100,000 years that I guess wolves and humans were this proto dog was kind of interacting with humans. So basically, they're saying the timeline goes much further back. And it suggests that early man may not have sought to domesticate dogs at all, but proto dog found it in his interest to hang around people, and then somehow persuaded them not to throw rocks at or eat him. which which I think that there has been some other, I shared an article on the Discord that this is a contentious subject because people are dog nutters, even scientists are dog nutters.
Yeah.
But so there was some researchers that disagreed with these findings and basically thought that earliest dogs were somewhat domesticated for use as food too.
Yeah.
So that theory is floating around out there, but basically both of those theories kind of disprove this myth we have surrounding dogs and humans that we co-evolved in this like very mutually beneficial relationship.
Right. The dogs essentially guided our evolution. So we'd be nowhere. Like, we'd all, if it weren't for dogs, we'd all just be swinging from vines right now. Right.
Yes.
Actually, I think it's the opposite. I think if it weren't for dogs, we'd all have vacation homes on Mars right now.
Honestly, yes. I really think that
We'll
dogs
be much further. We'll be much further as a species. Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Yes. So, I think this part's interesting. And if you guys, I'm sorry if I'm just kind of reading these articles, but I just think it's so interesting.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
So the scientists concluded that the earliest dogs must have been integrated somehow into human society and kept genetically isolated from the surrounding population of wolves. So domestication of dogs from wild populations must have been a rare event that only happened a few times in history. And then it goes on to say that this is a teleological statement, of course. If this scenario is correct, there was no conscious intent on the part of the dogs, and there was arguably no conscious intent on the part of people either. It was more of a situation of natural selection.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I think here's kind of the interesting part. The evolutionarily correct way to state all of this is that human beings, with their campfires and garbage heaps and hunting practices, but above all their social interactions, represented an ecological niche ripe for exploitation by wolves, or at least by those wolves that, through some chance modification in their genetic makeup, were able to exploit that niche and then prospered to pass those genes and traits on to their offspring. Although wolves today are the most widespread wild land mammal in the world, their total population probably numbers no more than 150,000. In the United States, there are about 50 million owned dogs and millions more unowned. Eloquent evolutionary testimony to the wisdom of mooching off people rather than fighting it out in the wild.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, again, I guess their experience with us put some evolutionary pressure on them. And again, you don't want to apply because people are going to apply agency, which really isn't the case. It's genetic. It's just that over all those thousands and thousands of generations, they, it like I said, it puts some evolutionary pressure or some natural selection on them to, enable them to be better at getting resources out of us, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So there's just a couple of more excerpts here I'd like to read, and then maybe just shift into a discussion on this topic. I just wanted to kind of prime the discussion with some of these actual, articles and references. I didn't, because this isn't just some weird, crazy theory because I hate dogs. Like, this seems to be the idea that dog is actually just a parasite on human society seems to be fairly well supported. The issue is people don't want to believe that about dogs. So it's not like a widespread, I guess, knowledge yet. Hopefully it will be. So human beings are primed to seize on what are in truth fundamental and programmed behaviors in dogs and read into them extravagant tales of love and fidelity. Often dogs need do no more than be their simple selves to amaze and beguile us. Take the protectiveness that dog owners almost universally impute on their pets. Protectiveness, quote, is almost certainly nothing of the kind. It's not a sign of the dog's loyalty or concern for us, but an example of what behaviorists call facilitated aggression. Rather than protecting us, the dog feels protected by us. Thus, he's emboldened to react to any threat that appears on his radar screen. This behavior is observed regularly in wolves. Aggression by a dominant member of the pack toward another wolf will trigger an attack by the other members. So essentially, what this article is saying is, in my understanding, dogs share a very large percentage of their DNA with wolves, obviously. And most of the behaviors that dogs exhibit and some of the traits that they've been selectively bred to carry on are nothing more than that. Like, they're nothing more than genetically programmed behaviors. The issue is humans have just attributed like human-like motivations to these behaviors.
Yep.
And dogs are parasitical on us because they've basically evolved to exploit that in us. Like, not consciously, but just, I guess, by nature. It's just a way that humanity is being exploited by this species. Just like cuckoos can prey on certain species of birds who, when they see that gaping, mouth, they're just like genetically driven to feed that baby bird without realizing how detrimental it is to them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, people tend to anthropomorphize various things, particularly in this space. That means when you anthropomorphize something, that means you're attributing human characteristics to something that's not human. And it's very, very common in this dog space. Very common.
Right. Okay, so last piece of this article that I think is really interesting and supports, I guess, this idea and this discussion is that dogs are social animals and so are humans. So reading social cues adeptly down to such details of body language as a flick of the ear or an angle of the tail is the most basic of canine instincts. That's what dogs do for a living. Gregory Ackland says, who's one of these researchers. They, quote, they figure out what's expected of them in a social situation and do it. So even people who are very bad animal trainers can usually make themselves understood to dogs. If you shout at a dog, it cringes. Does this mean the dog feels sorry for peeing on your oriental rug? The fact is, it doesn't matter. As far as the dog is concerned, whether he feels sorry or not. The cringe is a successful technique for deflecting aggression. Millions of years of wolf evolution have selected such behaviors because they're socially effective, and then thousands of years of dog evolution have fine-tuned such behaviors such that they are socially effective on people. Just as we are genetically programmed to seek signs of love and loyalty, dogs are genetically programmed to exploit this foible of ours. I mean, I don't really disagree.
Yeah, no, and that, probably fits with the experience of a lot of people. Even I've said, like, my stepdad with his dogs, and my experience with dogs is, I said, what I find is if I have a dog behaving aggressively, just lean in and just yell at him. And typically, I mean, maybe I have an advantage because I have this, really booming, loud voice, but it BTFOs them. They get it, and that may be sort of, like I said, indirectly inbred over the generations also. But of course, today everybody wants to treat their dog like it's a human infant, and you should never yell at them. So,
Right. So it seems like, as time goes on, uh, because these processes don't stop, right? I mean, nature didn't stop 12,000 years ago. And these processes are ongoing today. And now, for the last, what, maybe says in this article around 1870 is when kennel clubs were established in Britain. So for at least that long, people have been kind of directing the evolution of certain breeds of dogs. Now there's still, we see wild, I guess, feral mutts running around in various places. But certain, I guess, breeds have been specifically, I guess, designed by humans. But the vast majority of time that human beings have spent with dogs has not been this directed evolution. Like the
right.
idea that we somehow bred dogs to be our hunting companions like 12,000 years ago is just not at all supported by the science.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've got two kinds of, evolution. Like you said, you've got the directed evolution, which is deliberate line breeding. And that's been around for a while. I mean, even, probably going back to some of the early civilizations, like, the Romans, for example, would, create their war dogs. Like some of these dogs, like, I think is it Praces or Corsos, are actually very, very old. But those two things are really not mutually exclusive. Like you can line breed them intentionally and unintentionally, as is being discussed here. But also too, as a point is, 12,000 years ago, there was no kennel club setting standards 12,000 years ago, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, what there was a proto dog, which I think this article at some point says would bear very little physical characteristics different from wolves. Like they would have looked very similar to a wolf. Those proto dogs were just living alongside human civilizations and beginning their, I guess, parasitism on our species. Like that's the
So,
true history of dog, I think.
so like just a group of wolves broke away from the pack and eventually became what's called proto dogs, and they relied heavily on humans.
Yeah,
Makes
essentially
sense.
that seems to be the case.
Okay.
And that has continued for the last, what, 100,000 years until we're in the situation we're in today, where they have just become an increasingly, I guess, an increasing problem, an increasingly parasitic species on our existence. I mean, if you look at the amount of money, the first article I read, $69.5 billion annually people are spending on pets, but I'm sure a large portion of that is dogs. We see story after story on places like Tales from the Doghouse where mothers are spending, hundreds of dollars a month on these like premium dog food while their kids are eating, hot dogs and bologna.
Oh my god.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, not only that, but that's seen as being virtuous. Like that's what's
Yes.
happened though. And I think that probably, increases in technology the last 20, 30 years have really set this on fire. So it's almost like something that's been smoldering for a long time. And then social media came along and just dumped a tanker truck of gasoline on it. And it just whoom, blew up. Because, it's seen as being, when you have people who brag about, having dogs instead of kids, and like and people they feed their dog filet mignon, and the kids get store brand mac and cheese, and it's actually
Wow.
seen as being a good thing. like it's virtuous actually. And it goes back even the cuckoo, example, right? It's like you're expected to treat your dogs better than your kids in society, at least in some social circles, which is insane, but that seems to be the way it is. But yeah, so and
Yeah,
it fits perfectly. I mean, that's like at least it maybe not if you look at the big picture of dogs in society, it doesn't explain everything, but it definitely explains that aspect of it. Which may
yeah,
actually spread into other aspects because like I don't know if you have like pit bull kill somebody, it's like oh he's just a sweet little fur baby, that kind of thing.
right. Well, the article kind of alluded to this issue a couple of times, and it didn't. Unfortunately, I end up finding myself disappointed because a lot of these articles are very interesting and very like promising. Like, okay, finally someone is noticing that dogs are just these terrible parasites on our, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then the conclusions always end up being, but I think it's okay. It's worth it. The price we pay. This article that I just read to you literally has a portion in it where the guy is himself a dog owner and is like, "Oh, but all of this is worth it." But is it really? Is even a single dead child worth it? Like he even says right here, uh, it's impossible to say for sure if such problems are getting worse, referring to dog aggression. I don't think it's impossible to say that. It is getting worse. Aren't the statistics getting worse on dog bites per year?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And then he goes on to say, though there is no doubt that aggression in dogs is a widespread phenomenon, in Baltimore, a city of 80,000 to 100,000 dogs, there were 7,000 attacks on people in 1 year, according to a 1973 study. According to the CDC, each year in the US, 800,000 people are injured seriously enough by dogs to require medical attention. 6,000 are hospitalized by dog attacks, and about 15, mostly children, are killed. I believe, like I said, this article's from 1999. I think the numbers now are
Oh,
worse.
the numbers are way up, and actually, it's worse than that. I don't know if actually there was another article on dogsbite.org today, and actually, Colleen and I have discussed this both on our voice chat and also, privately. Is that yeah, the numbers are getting worse, and they're also very underreported because the incentive, given that everybody's supposed to worship the furry Jesus, but protect Fido's reputation, that there's an incentive to, I don't know if cover up is the right word, but at least withhold information about these things. So the gist of the article was that it's very common for if let's say a kid is mauled to death by a dog, to just rule it as an accident or to attribute it to something else, right? Because that's
Yes.
always the incentive, because again everybody is expected to and worship and glorify and protect these things. So it's very, very common. That's a problem with the statistics, is like that's whatever statistics you come up with, I would definitely add probably 30 to 50% to it in any given time frame. Because we get way, if somebody had posted in the Discord today that like in 1976 there was 1 million dog bites in the United States, I'm like, wow, how quaint.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Weren't those the good old days?
That's crazy.
I
Yeah.
mean, if there was a consumer product that was causing 800,000 serious injuries per year, it would be taken off the market
Oh yeah.
immediately, wouldn't it? I mean, and the
Absolutely.
company would go under,
Yeah.
there would be lawsuits you couldn't imagine. I mean, McDonald's had that famous lawsuit because one person got burned by their coffee. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, but when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
dogs, they can kill untold numbers of people and maul children per year and nothing happens. The only explanation to me for humanity behaving in such a contradictory way is that these dogs have hijacked our minds, essentially.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm not saying in a physical sense, like a parasite or whatever is like physically controlling our mind or whatever. I'm saying in a psychological sense
Yep.
because no one is that attached en masse to, let's say, a crib. Let's say there's a crib design that killed 15 infants 1 year. It would be unheard of. Like, that crib would never be sold. Like, it would be recalled. Like, there's just no examples of anything that would kill 15 children in a year and nothing would happen. And in fact, there would just be more of that thing the next year
Yep.
than dogs.
Yeah. Well, I
Yep.
guess because the
Yep.
thing is, the narrative is that, yeah, somehow it's all worth it because they've done all these amazing things for us. But a lot of that is, it goes back to all these things we keep saying, whether it's service dogs or police dogs or dogs in war. Really, either I would say the contribution is a negative. They're a liability. Even though you could argue, okay, maybe they occasionally do some good things, but everything's a trade-off. So if for every good thing they're involved in, they create 10 problems. That's a liability. But we're expected to believe that, really throughout human history, they've been this, huge benefit. And I don't believe so. Part of it, just because a cynical part of me says that almost everything that dog cultists say is a lie. It's either a flat out lie or it's some ridiculous exaggeration, right?
Yes.
So with that said, it's like they say, oh yeah, but back in early, like I was saying before, oh, they guided human evolution. And like, oh, really? Is that so? I don't necessarily believe that. Because I don't believe anything they say. And a lot of it is, okay, is that a valid anthropological thesis or more just like dog cult baloney? I think,
Yes, that
yeah.
is the perfect segue. I want to read. Okay, I skipped over this the first time because it's not necessarily like a brood parasite related, but it's in this Atlantic article, and I have to read it to you after you say that. So, consider countless stories about how dogs have, quote, saved people. In fact, dogs have no particular interest to save people and no particular understanding that this is what they're doing, or even when they do it. Search and rescue dogs are trained by exploiting the instinct to retrieve thrown objects. They're trained to fetch, and they are trained to fetch one toy only. Once they master that, they're ready for the next step. I didn't know this. So a
Wow.
person takes the toy and hides. The dog is then encouraged to find the toy. When he finds the quote victim, the dog is rewarded by getting his toy. Here is the actual here's the interesting part. At actual disaster scenes, trainers get someone to go and hide with the dog's toy several times a day so that the dog can score a few successes and not become frustrated. Did you know that? I did
Wow. I
not.
did not.
They don't
I
even really rescue people. They have people pretend to hide with the toy so the dog feels not frustrated that it's not actually like rescuing anyone. What? Is that what we've been led to believe? Like search and
it's
rescue
all a
dogs?
sham.
Yeah, it's a sham. It's a fraud. Well, the thing is too is it's funny, talk about like dogs as brood parasites. I know you remember. I don't know if did I talk about this on one of these voice chats? Maybe it was the last one before last. There was that incident, I think it was in Alaska, where a couple they were in Alaska. They were out hiking with their dog, and the dog, ran off. It was off leash, probably again counter to park rules. Fell through the ice in a river. Right.
Oh, I
So,
think
and the
yeah.
mom goes, oh noes, and runs in, dives in after the dog and drowns, right? Gets caught in
Oh
the
my
ice.
God.
And yeah, oh my
Oh.
dog
Oh
indeed.
my
And
God. What a
and so, but
tragedy.
this the part of there's a couple of punchlines. This one was, I think they had 5 kids. So now those 5 human kids, sorry. And so she basically commits suicide trying to save the fur kid. So now the 5 human kids are without a mother, right? But what was also interesting is that fits with the whole brood parasite thing. But what was also
Yes.
interesting was, they, so I don't know that sheriff's department was called because she disappeared under the ice. I mean, presumed dead. So they brought in some search and rescue dogs to find her,
To find her.
right? and to find her body essentially, and they were unable to do so. I think the last I heard, she was still missing. So I'm thinking, okay, the search. So the search and rescue dogs failed. They failed, right? Because it's like, well, they didn't find her, so that didn't work out, did it?
Yeah, it seems that they fail way more often than we've been always like led to believe.
Yep.
I mean, if they have to take, imagine this too. This just struck me so much from this article. Like, you're at an actual disaster scene and someone's out there literally wasting time hiding with a dog toy so the dog doesn't feel sad that it didn't find it. You don't think that you could have better spent your time actually looking for people?
Yep.
Like, you're out there hiding so a dog can find you? Like, really? That's what's going on at disaster. Can you imagine being like stuck under the rubble of a building after an earthquake and there's some idiot trainer out there just like hiding in the rubble so the dog can find its toy and you're, sitting there like suffocating and stuff?
Yeah.
It's just absurd to me the levels we go to these dogs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, they're only going to find something if they're like shown where to look. Like they're not doing it on their own initiative. And you see too. You remember there was that building collapse in Southside Florida a few years ago, and they brought in some search dogs for that. But it's like, what are you really looking for? You know that you've got this rubble pile, that anyone who's not accounted for is going to be dead under that rubble pile. So he's bringing in dogs to look. It's like, well, it's not like finding a needle in a haystack. It's like you're finding a needle in a pile of needles, right? I mean, it's there, but what good is it doing them, right? It's like you're going to have to pull all that stuff out anyway. They're there. Probably you can even smell the bodies as they're decomposing. So what is the dog doing for you? Like nothing. I mean,
Right.
probably, I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing to have them there, but probably at best they're just taking up space. But that's where dogs get credit to, like, oh yeah, all these rescue dogs are brought to, Surfside to look for what? For bodies that they know they're there.
Right.
They're not looking all over the place. It's not like they're searching far and wide all over the landscape. They're all, I mean, I guess it's possible there might be somebody alive in an air pocket under there, but
the dog's not going to pull them out.
The dog's not going to pull them out. You need heavy equipment to lift all those concrete slabs off. So it's basically Fido just keeps getting all these, participation awards.
Right. Well, it kind of reminds me. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add before you guys move on. So you guys are talking about rescue dogs. I think it's partially Hollywood's fault as to why people have this notion that dogs can save people and are heroic and want to do it. Because you have Lassie, and then you always have like these movies where like the dog jumps into the water and saves a kid, or the famous one going into a burning like house and to like pull their owners out.
Yeah.
So it's just like they try to well, I mean, they're doing that, they're trying to put them in the same position in real life, but it's a fail. Like I said, it's a sham. So it's like,
Right.
I
In
just wanted to point
reality,
that out.
yeah, in reality, you have people running into burning buildings and dying trying to save the dog. That happen. Like, that's what's happening. You have people jumping into boiling springs and dying to save dogs. People jumping into frozen rivers, like you mentioned, and
So
dying.
stupid.
You don't have the opposite. And then one other note, or one other, I guess, thing I wanted to mention about the brood parasite thing. You talked about that mother of 5, I think, dying trying to
Yep.
go after the dog. Well, think about all of the cases, like the one, was it Tennessee? The really horrible one where they had those
Oh, yeah.
two, what were they? Certain
So the Bernard
lions,
case,
whatever.
the
Yes.
Bernard case where both kids were killed. Yep.
So they had the dogs for what, like 8 years from puppies, right? And then they had 2 small one was only an infant. One was,
Yep.
2 maybe, and the other was just months.
6 months. Yeah, I think it was a 6-month-old and a 2-year-old.
And the dogs mauled and I guess were eating, I mean, just those 2 babies, and everyone is shocked, like, but is that not the cuckoo kicking the other eggs out of the nest almost? I mean,
Yeah,
what
perhaps.
Yep,
would
that's
cause
exactly what that
the
is.
behavior other than the dogs feel that its resource, the adults, are now being threatened by the new infants, the human infants? I mean, how many people have lost their actual children to dog aggression? It's more, one is too many, but it is at that level. I
Yeah.
mean, dogs killing actual human children, we're at that level of, I guess, brood parasite behavior. In my opinion, I mean, what else is it?
Yeah, that's
Like,
an interesting take on the Bernard case because I hadn't even thought about it because typically, and it kind of goes back, how I love, like one of my favorite things to do is beat up on the ADAP people. And Isha, I don't know if you've really gotten into how that's basically a dog lover that hates pit bulls. But their take on it was, well,
Yeah.
it's totally like dog fighting genetics. And actually, yeah, that might have been because that's sort of the inbred trade. But we also, though, the deliberate inbred trade. But yeah, we also have the sort of non-intentional or sort of passive inbred trade, right? To be that brood parasite. So it's a really interesting take because I like in a lot of situations, there's not a reason for what happened. There's probably a whole bunch of them because, yeah, you've got these 2 dogs. They've been family dogs for 8 years and, supposedly there've been no problems with them, but I don't believe that either. They may have been killing sheep off property or whatever, and it was just never reported because that kind of stuff happens a lot. But yeah, they killed both kids. They just boom, snapped and just boom, wiped out both kids. I was even going to go into details, but I'm not going to. It was so bad that I think all of the like first responders had got like immediate PTSD. Like that's how bad it was.
Oh my
Right, they'd
God.
never seen anything like it. Imagine somebody been a paramedic for 20 years and probably have seen many dog bites, but they were just like everybody would involved was just goes, well, they killed both kids and they tore the mother up really bad also.
yeah, she was in intensive care for a while, it seemed. I
Yeah,
never heard more
yeah,
after that. Seemed like the family kind of dropped off the face of the earth after the.
yeah. Well, that was it was interesting because I don't know about her so much, but the dad was a pit bull activist, right? He'd posted things like, well, they'll never, it was an anti-BSL activist essentially. And so, because they knew, really both of them knew the counter argument to, bringing these things into the home and the community. But, and that was the other thing too, is even when I've done monologues on that case and discussed it in voice chats also, the sympathy that people had was like just almost as much or more than in some cases for the dogs and the kids. It's like, oh yeah, not only did you lose your children, but your
You
2
lost your.
sweet special dogs also. And I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like
Yeah.
it's inexplicable. It's totally uh it's at a level that is, I think, best explained by examining biology at this point. You know what I mean? Like there's
Yeah.
something very interesting. Well, and we've seen uh the studies that are like, oh, when you gaze into your dog's eyes, your oxytocin increases and stuff, and it's like,
Oh, good Lord.
I have
but
something to share on that if you're interested.
yeah, for sure.
Okay, because this kind of segues into we're kind of getting maybe a little off topic, but still on it.
I think it's all very related though.
Yeah, let me fire the share up. Where am I here? Okay, I'm gonna start the share. And where is that? Why is that not showing? I got maybe is it this? Okay, yeah, I think that's it. Let me know if you can see.
Yep, it's up now.
Yeah.
Okay. So you see there's the dog on the left and the little girl on the right. But look at those. See what this is I don't know
Oh my
how I even
God.
got this. This was on my Facebook page, like feed. And I don't even really do much with Facebook. I don't get into dog stuff, but Alicia, you and I were talking about this last week, was that all this dog stuff pops up. So anyway, this Green Witch Homestead has decided to be an activist against some of the new dog laws in the United Kingdom, right? So they posted this. So see, but look at this. Can you see? Look
Oh
at
my
those. This is an
God.
XL bully. Look at those puppy dog eyes. This is a video. Look at those puppy dog eyes. It's like,
Oh
oh,
my
how could you
God.
ban that? How could you ban them? Oh, please, no.
Yeah,
They're just these sweet little perfect fur babies sent from heaven. It's
I
so
couldn't.
horrible.
It's really disturbing, and I don't have anything in front of me. I know I've read this in some article. Don't quote me on it. I don't want to say I don't want to misspeak, but I remember reading something about the development of that particular muscle in that dogs have and wolves
Like,
do not. The
yep,
one that makes them able to, people believe that they're making an expression, right? People believe that dogs are expressing emotion. I don't I don't believe that. I think that it's another interesting weird characteristic that some of these proto dogs evolved to have more success in exploiting human beings with the
yep,
existence of that little muscle that
Yeah.
I mean, that dog's gonna make these expressions that you think are like, oh, look, it's so sad, right before it bites that little girl's face off. I mean,
right. Well, no, see, he's sad that the government is banning him. I mean, aren't dogs like citizens too? Like, why does our prime minister hate us so much? I'm just this like
I'm gonna be separated from my sister here that
yeah, I
you
would to
see.
be
Oh,
separated from my sister. I would to be banished like to the United States, like so. Like they're
oh
gonna have
God,
a
please
whole,
no.
it's like an underground railroad of, well, it's funny because now I'm sort of segueing into BSL politics, but they banned him in England and Wales, so they're like, okay, we'll ship them all to Scotland. So what happens? Well, all these dog maulings like go through the roof there, so now they want to ban them. So it's like now they gotta ship them all, do like a massive like XL bully boat lift to either like mainland Europe or the US. Well, but
Don't
that's what it
bring
is.
them here.
Look at that. Look at that face. Like, how could you say no to that? How could you ban that? But you're right, Sheepy. I mean, that's probably something that evolved into them probably a long time ago. And actually, I mean, that's what it's saying is. But what's happened though is that current technology is allowing this to spread like wildfire, right? Because you see, because it
Yeah.
makes it so easy. Because you look at this, even 40 years ago, well, I mean, you could show things on TV, but yeah, everybody, they're all broadcasting this propaganda and it's everywhere. And you're looking, it's like, because he looks sad. And of course, there are why does he look sad? It's like, I don't know, maybe they ran out of dog biscuits, but what they're doing, they're anthropomorphizing. They're saying, it's sad. It's really a sad day in Britain that they, banned these, perfect and pure, fur angels sent from heaven.
Right. Yeah, it looks sad, but it's probably not, right? Like
Yeah,
it's
it's not.
probably learned that when I move this muscle above my eye, it gives me food like the human feeds
Yep.
me. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? That's
Yep.
basically what my whole takeaway from all of this brood parasite stuff is dogs are just really, really well evolved to exploit human beings' emotions and feelings and thoughts about like human beings, desire to anthropomorphize them, basically.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, you see it too. We've talked about this before. How in like a lot of shows and cartoons and animations now they'll animate every animal as if it's behaving like a dog. Like it's a moose or something, and it's like panting and like licking and begging and you know what I mean, mewling
Right.
like a dog. Everything like we relate now to like these anthropomorphized dog behaviors. Like it's just very strange. Like dogs have really I just think it's apparent when you start to think about it. The dogs are the only animal I can think of that have co-opted our imagination and psyche in this way to this
Yeah.
extent.
Well, I mean, they're definitely, they have a ton of political and social capital. I mean, in a way that nothing else does. Because, as we pointed out many times, it's like, if anything else were doing these things, even if it were another animal, they'd be gone, right? They'd be done. That's why, like, why, 'cause that's why people talk about, like, whataboutism, or what about horses, or what about cats? It's like, you don't have problems with those things in communities because they're restricted. Like, nobody has a pet mountain lion, right? Nobody has a horse in your downtown apartment tower, because all those things don't have, because I guess, yeah, they don't have this, right? They don't have like, yeah, this puppy dog look, this appeal. And it is, I mean, it's an appeal, but it's not useful. It's toxic.
Yeah, I just want to jump in on this whole how they're able to manipulate their face to reflect human emotions. So I was just like thinking that I think you guys already may have like mentioned this. But they do that because it's like, because like dogs, they always beg for food, like no matter what. And
Yep.
so making that face, it to me doesn't necessarily look sad. It does, but it also to me it looks like it's begging through his face, like please.
Yep. Give me
Yes,
Um,
something. Yep.
yeah. So
they're so incredibly driven by food. Like almost all the more I read, like almost all training modalities for dogs is like based on food. Almost all of their behaviors are driven by food. They're even incredibly sneaky. If you want, I don't, that's probably still anthropomorphizing them too much. Yeah. They're driven by
boo.
baby Ryans.
Baby rights. I like that. Oh, here's another one that's like pink
I
shet
like
mud
that
meat.
one.
See,
Yeah.
if you're cold, they are cold. So bring them inside and warm them up.
Warm them up.
Warm them up. Yum, yum.
Well, that dog regret on Reddit is great.
I never knew about that until you shared it. And I was enjoying reading through that today.
Talk about taboo. That's the thing, is like those people, I mean, in society are regarded even worse than us because, like I said, it's a religion. So you have folks that are like, folks like us, we would be considered like, infidels, like, pagan or heathen unbelievers, but they are apostates, right? Somebody who, is in the space but wants out of it because they're fed up with a dog. And the apostate, I guess I should do that, like a hierarchy of like, anti-mutt people, but the apostate is the worst. And you can see that whenever somebody says, it's like, well, I can't keep my dog anymore, I need to rehome them. And you could argue, it's like, okay, they're trying to do the right thing for the dog, but they just did the hate that is poured. It's like, it's like an avalanche of white hot lava is poured on those people. Like they're hated even more than people like us. It's unbelievable. But because of this, like, how could you give this away? You're the spawn of Satan. You're the reincarnation of Hitler. Ugh, it's crazy.
It's bizarre too because when I look at that thing, I see the little girl next to it, I feel like this is not cute at all. Like that creature does not look cute to me, even with its little like
Mhm.
sad eyes or whatever. It looks gross and threatening. Like it could easily kill her. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It could easily kill me. So I wonder a lot, like in light of this brood parasite theory and things like that, and knowing that studies have shown when a dog owner gazes into the dog's eyes, it releases like the person's blood levels of oxytocin increase by like a large amount. Are there some people who are immune to this, or like, you know what I mean? Did some of us evolve differently or have different, I guess, susceptibility levels to this sort of thing? You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
I
Oh, no,
don't
no. Yeah,
feel
that's a good
that I'm.
thought. Well, I mean, just like, some people, some folks are more genetically inclined to be alcoholics than others. It runs in families, but I believe that's the case. I'm not an expert on addictions, but, and even as I look at this, it's like, I mean, maybe I'm slightly less resistant to it than you are, but I mean, I know I hear what you're saying, but I can see where the appeal is, because it does, the superficial impression is he's got this sad look. Oh, poor me. That is kind of what he looks like. I mean, it doesn't make me want to run out and adopt one, or
No.
or
Yeah.
agitate against laws restricting them, but I can see where the appeal is.
Well, this kind of segues into an interesting topic. Because I will admit, like, I haven't always been, I guess, woke on dogs or whatever you want to call it. Like, I haven't always been this I haven't always found dogs this abhorrent, or I'm more disgusted today by dogs than I was, I guess, in the past. And I do believe that the first child, like the first time I got pregnant, something in my brain like changed. And I think that this happens to a lot of women because I've seen so many times on Tales from the Doghouse, especially, but different places on Reddit, even just on pregnancy related um, forums and stuff, where women, it's like they're dog owners, they've had these dogs, and then they get pregnant and something just changes. And they suddenly, it's like, oh my God, this thing is filthy, it stinks, it's gonna be a threat to my tiny precious infant. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it noise
So
pollutes.
yes, and I see it so often, and I think it's interesting from a biological perspective because I don't ever think I've seen one instance of that with a man where he was like, "My wife's pregnant. I hate the dog now."
Right.
Nope.
But
It's always the man that wants to keep the dog.
I see that a lot of the time. Yeah.
well, I think that, yeah, there's different factors at play here. Talk about getting woke on the issue. And obviously I didn't get woke because I got pregnant. That didn't happen. But you're right though too. It's like, yeah, there can be, biological reasons for somebody, shifting their perspective on this. I mean, in my case, like with a lot of people, it's more for like practical or real world experience reasons. But even though too is like, not to start a big debate over it, but there's many women too who even they even after they have kids, they like the kids more than the dog. You know, they're
Oh, I have
they're,
an example of that.
they're the ones, because they'll feed the dog, like I said, filet mignon, and they'll give the kids Cheerios for
Baloney and
breakfast.
yeah.
That's so, but I guess that's the thing, is like with those people, I guess, yeah, it depends. I probably, on the person's biological or perhaps, overall mentality. Like some people will never become woke on this issue no matter what happens.
Right.
Right. But some people will. It depends on, I guess, how resistant you are to it. And there's also, again, a lot of social pressure there also, right? Because that, like, not forget about hating dogs, even like not worshiping the furry Jesus is taboo, right? And people know that. So, but anyway, Isha, you're going to say something.
Yeah, so since we are touching on how both the mother and father, like parents, how they react biologically to when they're introducing like a human child. So there's an example that I found on Reddit somewhere. I forget which subreddit, but it was like these young-ish like parents, and they had, I don't know what kind of dog they had, but they had a dog, a pre-existing dog, and then so she was pregnant, she gave birth, and you know how they had that stupid tradition where they're introducing their dog to the newborn.
Oh, pfft.
Exactly. So they, introduced the dog to the infant, and they said that the dog rejected the baby. Now, I don't know what that looks like, but this was like in an article or something like that. Or maybe it was just like a some sort of Reddit where it was like a really long article type post. And they said that the dog rejected the baby, and they tried to like do it again, and the dog just rejected the baby again, whatever that looks like. And so they gave their baby up for adoption.
Oh, jeez, really?
I'm not kidding. And when I find that, hopefully it's
Yeah, no,
still out. I
I
have to
don't.
see where I got it from. I have to find
I
it and
don't
put
know.
it
I'm
in the
sure that's
Discord.
happened. That's a
Yeah.
pretty extreme case, but I'm sure that's happened. And I'm sure, you know what, probably many like your level 5 dog nutters will be like, yeah, if it comes
Level
down
5.
to the dog or the kid,
Apple
the
pie.
kid. Not at all. A lot of times, people ask, they say, well, they ask these hypothetical questions like, okay, if you run into a burning building and there's a dog and a person, and you can only carry out one, which one do you save? And it's like, you know what, that's it. It's kind of maybe it's an interesting thought experiment, but it's not really all that useful because how many people find themselves in that situation? Now, like if it were me, I would save neither because I'm just going to save my own ass. But but that's the thing is, but then you think about, okay, here's a more real world example. Would you like if your dog behaves dangerously towards your kid, what do you do? What do you do? Do you just let it play out, or how do you manage that? Or like, yeah, if you had, or how do you take care of them? Like if your dog, would you feed your dog an expensive diet at the expense of your kid? Would you do that? Because many people do that. Now this comes up. It's like, okay, if the dog and the kid don't mix, and you have to give one of them up, what do you do? And again, but you pointed out, it's like, yeah, I'm sure that happens. They say, all right, the kid's got to go, and that is to make the understatement of the century. That is really fucked up.
Yeah. Well, and even earlier today from I think it was the dog regret subreddit, there was this woman posting on me and my husband adopted this dog and immediately he was like crying every day like it was the worst thing we've ever done like describes this like horrible situation like how much the dog was terrible, it was like just poorly behaved. Anyways, they ended up getting rid of it like not long after getting it in the first place. But then she was like, her takeaway was, now we're worried like if we could ever have children, like does this mean we shouldn't have children because we hated this dog? I mean, talk about like uh, apples and oranges or like
Yep.
imagine just but people have been
Hmm.
so brainwashed into this idea that dogs are like children, like the equivalent of having your own baby or your own child, that people are literally like, "Oh my god, I'd be a terrible mother because I hated this stinking, filthy thing that was biting me in the face." Like,
Yeah, really. Well, I mean, would
that's
you
not
be
what
like,
it's.
would you be a bad parent because you don't want to, I don't know, swim in a river full of alligators? It's like, what's the difference? Um, yeah, yeah, that's interesting. But I mean, like yeah, you're right. That dogs and kids are two completely different use cases. I mean, it's possible somebody could hate dogs and be a bad parent, but you look at like why do people get these dogs anyway? Like, what's the use case? I mean, half of them just get it to terrorize the neighborhood, because they probably think maybe it is like a kid, but it's a kid that can like intimidate the neighbors. Not too many people, have children for that reason. So what made you decide to have kids? Well, because I wanted to terrorize the neighborhood. Yeah, that's pretty unlikely, but
Right. Well, the beginning of this Atlantic article even describes the way dogs behave, and then says if we had roommates who behave like this, we'd be calling a lawyer or the police.
yeah, yeah,
Like the stuff people put up with from dogs, like if dogs were the equivalent of a human child, you would be getting that child into some kind of serious like help, right? Like
Yeah,
that kid would
exactly. Yeah.
need some kind of real, like there would be a real
Yeah, I
problem.
mean, they're animals, and it's like, and I don't even, you don't necessarily have to hate dogs or hate animals to realize, yeah, they're not people. They're not, so it's like, they're animals, and they should be treated like animals. I'm not saying they should be treated badly, but, but that's something that's happened also is that, yeah, if you don't treat your dog like it's a human infant, it's somehow, you know, animal abuse. I think we brought that up. Was it the last chat or the one before? Actually, because it was the dog culture review host pointed out because he stumbled over something, and it was something I hadn't picked up on until that point. They love to abuse social justice narratives, and they they said that, or the gist of the article was that, yeah, expecting a dog to behave right? Like preventing it from barking or attacking people was patriarchal, right? It's an expression of toxic masculinity somehow, and it's like that's ridiculous. It's like, where did that come from? But
Yeah, I don't want it to be feminist for dogs to bite people.
yeah,
Like,
exactly. It shouldn't be because it's an animal. It's not a person. But yeah, they've elevated them to that level, and that's why all these problems are so. Problems with dogs in society are so difficult to solve, like dogs on airplanes or whatever, or restaurants. It's like you can bring your kids to restaurants. Why can't I bring Fido and Rover? Because Fido and Rover aren't people.
right. Well, in the brood parasite theory, no, I guess they essentially are to some people. They've
Yeah,
totally hijacked those people's brains on some kind of physiological level. Like these people have some kind of intense oxytocin response to the gaze of a dog, and
yeah,
it's causing them to behave in ways that are extremely harmful to the rest of society.
yeah. Yeah, well, it's not only yeah, because they can do no wrong. They're yeah, they're just these like perfect, fur babies. They're better than human kids.
Right, they're a
They're
perpetual baby.
they're perpetual babies. Yep.
Yeah, maybe that's kind of an interesting thought. Maybe that's part of what's going on with the people becoming so obsessed with these dogs is that you know, a baby eventually grows up, which is generally the good thing about children raising them. You get to see them develop into a whole person and live their life out and interact with them uh, throughout their entire life, right? But a dog never really gets beyond that. Like it's always going to be staring at you with
Well,
its
it's
puppy-dog
always going
eye
to be
forever.
a dog, right? It's never going to be anything else.
Right.
Like the people who they hate kids and they love dogs. It's like, hey, dummies. All of us were kids once. None of us were dogs once, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's really interesting. I find I think it would be interesting to talk about how like the social media aspect has maybe amplified the pre-existing
Oh,
like
definitely.
you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Social parasite.
Well, even
Like
if
the
you
dog
look
is a
at
social
just
parasite and now it's a
even
social media parasite.
yeah, even just look at what I have up on the screen now because they're able to broadcast this all over the place. So who knows? Probably people are going to watch this and they're like, "Oh, Fido looks so sad."
I wonder if looking at a dog on the screen has the same oxytocin effect as looking at a dog. You know what I mean? Like if you
Yeah,
show people this picture and they're looking at those sad eyes, are they also releasing oxytocin as if the dog was there with maybe it's made things so much worse, the social media, because it is having the same effect on people that but like times a million because you're looking at millions of dog videos a day now. You know what
yeah.
I mean?
I guess too, because there could be other, obviously, like the virtual world isn't the real one. So, probably, looking at pictures, just like, watching movies or whatever, you're seeing, an idealized version of something, right? Because particularly if you look at, I said I talk to folks about, Facebook or other social media. You got to read, because sometimes people complain. I've had people say this to me. It's like everybody looks like they're having such a great life, and it kind of gets me down. And I said, look, their Facebook page, it's a very carefully crafted piece of personal propaganda, right? They're not typical. Sometimes they do, but often they're not posting the bad thing. Like if this dog had torn a hole in the wall, I think they might show it, but probably not. So somebody sees this and they don't see the downside of having a dog. They don't see like the neighbor's kid that's in the hospital, or they don't show the neighborhood cat that got torn in half. They don't show the damage to the house and piles of dog crap in the kitchen, right? And all the downsides to having these things around. They just see this. They're like, oh, those puppy dog eyes. Who can say
Right.
no? Who can say no? And that's probably where you get a lot of the dog regret people, because they get caught up in this propaganda. And then when they actually take one of these things home, they realize it's not all that it's cracked up to be, is it?
Yes, that's exactly what that thing that was posted earlier that I was reading said. The guy literally was like crying his eyes out because the parts of owning a dog that he thought would be minor inconveniences, and they listed the stink, the dirt, the fur everywhere, he found to be intolerable. And the stuff he thought would be fulfilling and like give him this happiness and help cure his like depression or whatever, like the walking of the dog and things like that, he found like meaningless and unfulfilling.
Yeah.
So basically the opposite of everything that it's portrayed as.
Yeah.
It's a chore, that's why. Because
Exactly.
it cuts into your, your social time. Like I have a I have a friend, and this person has like a dog, and there's been times when we would like meet, grab food, whatever, and then they would have to like cut out because they have to go home and take care of their dog. They have to go walk it. They have to make sure it's fed and everything. And then it's like, wow, like that's I mean, you really consider I don't understand it. Like it's cutting into your personal time. Like it's just weird to me. People are really treating it like a child, as if it's like, you leave your kid at home for a couple of hours, and then you have to like run home, make sure that they're, they did their homework, that they're fed, that they, whatever. So it's I don't know. They put too much care into it.
Yeah, it's just truly inexplicable to me. So I think that kind of like, I don't know, is it maybe
Well,
segues
actually,
kind of
we
into.
actually did explain it. There's a lot of good ideas here, um, and I would say, yeah, it is a brood parasite. I mean, there's more to it than that, but it's definitely part of it. And you could argue maybe it's like a root cause, because yeah, they've evolved the ability to exploit the parental instincts. And I mean, probably in women and men, people have a desire to protect kids. And again, that's only part of it, but it is, I think, a key component of it. And maybe that's the foundation of it. Is like maybe the all the other aspects of this sort of build off of that. The social and political and public policy aspects of that. That's why it's like easier to shoot a human in self-defense and get away with it than it is to shoot a dog in self-defense and get away with it. Because you don't need to defend yourself against a toddler, right? I mean, that's just ridiculous. Even though, like, obviously this isn't a toddler, this is an animal that could take down a grown man. But
Yeah, 100%. But and that okay, so that's an interesting point. I had another article here that was from Wired magazine. When was this published? 2015, and it says why people care more about pets than other humans. And it says newspaper editors tell me animal abuse stories get more responses from readers than articles about violence against humans. And it goes on to list a few studies that were done and a couple of incidents in the media uh, to demonstrate this idea that people seem to get a lot more upset over perceived, like, crimes against dogs than against people. Um, and I think that plays into the whole, like, viewing dogs as these, like, perpetual innocent toddlers. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Yep.
like there is here a shooting of a pregnant woman, and then a shooting of a dog by a police officer. And it's like the shooting of this pregnant woman went almost totally, you know, unnoticed. Like people are just like, oh yeah, well, it makes sense. They would shoot her, right? Like she was clearly doing something wrong. But when the dog got shot, the story became such a major ordeal that here it says there was a headline in the New York Daily News proclaiming Idaho cop shoots and kills adorable black lab named Arfie after mistaking him for an aggressive pit bull. Then a Justice for Arfie Facebook page was created. A shadowy organization called Anonymous was posting ominous videos vaguely threatening the Coeur d'Alene police officer that shot the dog. And then eventually, the citizens of Coeur d'Alene staged a Justice for Alfie rally, demanding that the police officer be fired. And finally, the police department issued an official apology to the owner of the dog and awarded him $80,000 in damages. Meanwhile, the pregnant mother of two that was shot and killed, like just a few miles from this dog incident, basically, let's see, almost nothing happened.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just she had a history of drug addiction, it says. Uh, why the police officer opted to shoot her is unclear. But eventually, the officers were exonerated, no apology was given to her family, and the story never made national news.
Yeah.
This was 50 miles away. So the dog getting shot made public outrage to the extent that the guy got $80,000 in damages. The pregnant woman being shot basically was just nothing happened. So it's just strange because I don't know. And then the article goes on to list these studies that were done, hypothetical stories about a dog, a puppy, an infant, and an adult being like beaten with a bat. And I'm surprised to find out that the story that an adult human was the victim elicited by far the lowest levels of emotional distress. The winner was the human infant, but the puppy was a close second, and the adult dog was third, not far behind the first two. So, yeah, people equate puppies and human infants almost like equally. And an adult dog still beats out an adult human
Yeah.
when people are surveyed. So it's just, I don't know. It's just, to me, the social parasite, brood parasite thing really is the only thing that has made sense to me to explain this type of like phenomenon that we have with dogs.
Yeah. Another interesting aspect of this before I lose the thought, and maybe it's probably a chat for another time. I think we're probably past an hour and a half now, is that, dog owners are definitely social parasites. I mean, they're classic social parasites because, they endlessly make demands of others, but do nothing in return. Again, they create all these problems, but again, what do they or their dogs offer in return? It's like nothing. Like the neighborhood yard barker does what? Nothing. It's a total nuisance, right? But yet they're allowed to get away with this. So it's just parasitism all the way down by the animals themselves and the imbeciles that own them.
Yes, 1000%. And then if we're gonna start winding down, I have one final article here. It's really brief. It's from 2007, a Slate article called Why People Love Dogs. It's more complicated than you think. And this also just supports all the things we just discussed. And they reference this psychologist from the University of Central Lancashire named John Archer. And he says, in evolutionary terms, love for dogs poses a problem. His alternative Darwinian theory is that dogs manipulate the same instincts and responses that have evolved to facilitate human relationships, primarily, but not exclusively, those between parent and child. So he says, consider the possibility that pets, he uses the word pets, but I'm talking about dogs here, are in evolutionary terms manipulating human responses and that they are the equivalent of social parasites. Social parasites inject themselves into the social systems of other species and thrive there. Dogs are masters at that. They show a range of emotions, thus tricking us into thinking they possess the full range of human feelings. As Archer dryly puts it, continuing features of the interaction with the dog prove satisfying for the owner. And that's basically the explanation, is our emotions have been hijacked by this social parasitic animal, or this brood parasite.
Unreal. Unreal. But yeah, it's an interesting thesis, and it's also interesting to delve into, like, why do some people resist it more than others? But a lot of people don't. It's even in I was never a dog person myself. I didn't really care for them, but I wasn't really critical of the animals themselves or dogs in society. It wasn't until I, moved here and started having a lot of problems in the neighborhood, and I had a lot of problems with dogs as a hike leader, and I started seeing other problems with dogs, and this whole light went on. I was like, wow. And I realized too, it's like, yeah, probably how, propagandized I had been, that I didn't become woke sooner, right? Like, it really took a lot to sort of get over not only probably the social, but like you said, perhaps a biological conditioning also. It's I kind of the only problem I have, I'm not saying it's wrong. The problem with that thesis is, like, a lot of, like, your level 5 dog nutters are going to be like, see, we have a special genetic connection, right? They guide us. They show us the rules of life. They get us through everything. And, like, no, not really. It's not a good. It's like, tapeworms live off of us also, but that's not something we want either.
No, they have a special relationship with us, the
Yeah, they have a
tapeworms. They
special
help me lose
relationship.
weight. I
Well,
love that.
you could probably argue the tapeworms do also, but it's not. But that's the kind of thing. It's like, well, it's a special connection and all that. But okay, fine. But is it a good thing or a bad thing? Like, is it something we want or not? That's the question.
Right, well, that's the bizarre thing. In almost every single one of these articles, the conclusion is always that it's good. So
Yeah.
again, just to give an example, so the same article from Slate, psychologist Brian Hare of Harvard has studied the human-animal bond and reports that dogs are astonishingly skilled at reading humans' patterns of social behavior, especially related to food and care, unsurprisingly. Quote, it appears that dogs have evolved specialized skills for reading human social and communicative behavior, he concludes. And then they go on to say, the author of this, if the dog's love is just an evolutionary trick, does that diminish it? I don't think so. Like,
I mean, I
why?
don't think so, but
It
it's not really
means it's
love,
not
though.
real.
It's
Yeah,
not
it's not
really
even
love.
love.
It's just a way to, again, yeah, they've evolved. Yes, they've evolved to basically, scam resources out of us. But that's not love.
Exactly. That's not
That's not
love.
love. I mean, do tapeworms love us? I mean, probably not. I mean, I don't know for a fact, but my guess would be no.
They love our resources.
They love our resources.
Exactly. I don't understand how you can read this and write articles like this and then still conclude, but it's worth it. The dogs
Yeah,
love us and we love them. Haha. Like, how do
it's
you conclude that?
it's interesting how somebody can read all the data and come to like a totally skewed conclusion on it. Or it doesn't have to be
Right.
skewed. I mean, you could say, okay, perhaps it's a neutral thing. Like it's not really good or bad. I guess it depends on what sort of value you place on it, right? Um, they say they value, quote, the dog's love, like it's that's sort of the countervailing benefit. But the thing is, they really don't love us. I mean, not in any, like, again, it's more anthropomorphization. Yeah, they're just, basically they're just, feeding off our altruism, off our generosity. And actually, too, is if dogs were harmless, I probably wouldn't care too much. Well, I probably wouldn't be having this conversation in the first place. But the thing is, yeah, you know what? There's so many downsides to dogs in society that sort of like, yeah, this relationship is like somehow like it makes it all worth it. I don't think so.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's the most bizarre part of this whole thing to me has been reading the you just wrote dogs send 800,000 people to Syria, like the hospital, and kill 15 children a year. You just wrote that, and now, like 2 pages later, you're like, but I love my Fido. He's so cute and
yeah.
worth it. Like, what are you talking about? How do you write that? How do you
Well, I think
write that
probably
dogs
because,
kill children every year and then you love dogs still?
yeah, well, I just had the thought. I mean, there's so much to unpack here that, dog people are just, they're totally narcissistic and selfish and self-focused that they're just really, they can read that stuff and write about it, but really they're oblivious to all that. All they know is that they believe, right? They have faith that their dog adores them. And that's really all that matters. And that's really, one problem with like dog culture is that, as long as the dog and the dog owner get what they want, like in the now, like in the very short term, it's all good. Like that's the only thing of any concern because that's really, they're so self-focused. That's the only thing they're able to concern themselves with. And, it never occurs to them that all these problems they cause are going to bring consequences. But at some point, like, it goes around, comes around. It's going to pay negative dividends in the long run, but they're just oblivious to that, because people are going to say, you know what, I don't care how much you think your dog loves you, because that's what it is. It's faith, really.
Yep.
It's a faith-based, belief system. I mean, even though there is some science behind this. I mean, these are all, I guess, some valid anthropological theses. But But yeah, but are these like good things? I mean, do we attribute like value to this? And they talk about like they're going to argue, well, they contributed to the success of the human race. It's like, no, because really, again, all I see are a lot of participation awards being handed out. I think, in fact, like we were joking about in the beginning, it's like humanity may have thrived in spite of them.
Yes,
Right. Like, in other
I
words,
believe that.
somebody could say, okay, hey, you know what? I won the tennis tournament with a sprained ankle. Does that mean that you want to sprain your ankle before pursuing a tennis tournament? It's like, no, again, it was like, turns out, okay, it wasn't bad enough to cause a loss, but it didn't help, right? It didn't improve the outcome at all.
1000%. Just, yeah. I mean, if there was any other creature sending 800,000 million people to the hospital annually, you know what I mean? It would be intolerable. It would be considered an intolerable
Oh
situation.
yeah. Well, a lot of these things would be, even the noise, well, I don't want to forget about bites, but even noise polluting. Many other animals have been zoned out, like ducks and geese, because they're too noisy. Think, well, what other domestic animal makes lots of noise? Let's think about that. I mean, you could justify, restricting them just based on, let's say no dog had ever bit anybody. You could justify restricting them. I mean, provided, we take away all the privileges attributed to these things, you could justify restricting them just based on the noise pollution issue alone, or the
Right.
dog crap issue, or whatever the other problems they're involved in. So,
Right. Well, people are banning like leaf blowers, right? People are
yeah,
freaking out about leaf blowers and stuff. And it's like they are loud and obnoxious. I'm not gonna, argue with that. But they're not like I don't hear leaf blowers
it's not a chronic
24/7 in my
problem.
house.
Yeah,
Right. Like
exactly. It's like, and even the thing is, yeah, it's like, okay, I hear a leaf blower 5 minutes a week, and I hear dogs bark like 100 hours a week. I know. Let's, it's an ultimate like relative privation fail. I know. Let's ban leaf blowers. Yeah, that'll like make the acoustic environment so much better.
those leaf blowers are preventing me from hearing the dogs bark for 5 minutes a week.
Yeah, no. It's
Ban
like, yeah,
them.
they're drowning out the voice of dog. Anyway, yeah, let's wrap it up. Isha, you didn't get a chance to talk much. You want to wrap things up? Do you have any thoughts as we close?
Um, let me see. I did write some notes, but maybe I already said something. Yeah, about them making their face like reflect human behaviors. Let me see if
Yeah,
let's see.
like the
Social.
puppy dog. Look at the puppy dog eyes.
No, he's so sad. He needs more children to nanny.
Yeah.
Well, I'll add this last thing. So I like for the people that are in my life, I'm not gonna point anyone else specifically. I've noticed, especially like a person in particular, they are really becoming like dependent on their dog. Like I understand, like as we get older, we see our friends less and less, but I feel like, and not just like my situation, but just people in general, like they rely on their dog for like really for companionship. Like how they say, oh, they're great companions and stuff like that. They really take that to heart, I think, because it's like all they need is their dog, and it's just like after a while they become like less social to other people. They kind of withdrawn. Like that's been my observation, and they become like awkward. They don't know how to like relate to people, and they're like inconsiderate, and it's like they lose their social grace because they are just so like they pouring so much into their dog that they're like in a bubble,
Yeah,
essentially.
they withdraw into to some kind of dog bubble, and become more
Hmm.
and more dependent on it.
Yeah.
Like self-sabotaging.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like they don't know how to like interact in like social situations, like kind of like inject themselves into a conversation, like let's say like at like some sort of like event where you had to like you know interact with colleagues or stuff like that. I feel like if you go down like the deep end when it comes to like being obsessed with your dog, it's just like how, if you don't read, you don't know how to like write really well. Like it affects your motor skills. So like I feel like dogs affects us, like our not our motor skills, but like how we are able to like socialize and interact with one another.
Yeah, the social skills, I guess, atrophy if they pursue
Hmm.
that, to some ridiculous extent, sure. And probably too is people like maybe they use a dog as a, shield or an excuse for not, pursuing social activities or perhaps more worthwhile activities. Yeah. Yeah, it seems like more people are, getting that way. But then the problem is too, it's seen as being it's socially, not just socially acceptable to do, but desirable to do, right? You want to, everybody needs to dedicate their lives to dog.
Yeah, I think that's accurate what you've described, because I've noticed too in my personal life the biggest like nutters, if you will, are always like the least pleasant to be around.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously.
They end up, they're the type of people where you go to their house and it's like, oh, the dog lives here, you're just a guest, like type
Oh my
thing.
god, I hear that all the time, like in memes and everywhere. And it's like you go to their house and you ask them to put the dog in a different room. And then it's like they take offense to it. It's like, well, what's wrong with my dog? Why you don't
Right.
want to interact with my dog? And no,
That's my
this is
baby. No.
Yeah.
this is Fido's house.
Yeah,
You don't live
you
here.
wouldn't tell them to put their lock their kids in the basement, would you?
How dare you?
Well, but the other thing is you talk about like social parasites, or they're always making demands of others, but unwilling to reciprocate because they think they can take their dog to your house. And then it can jump up on the kitchen counter and like pee on the rug and it's all good, right? If you don't want it, well, yeah, again, you're a horrible person for not accommodating the dog.
Right, but if your kid went to their house and started peeing everywhere, they'd have a big problem with that.
Yes.
It's just so contradictory and hypocritical.
Yeah, it is, Well, yeah, it's part of the doggy double standard, the big social double standard. Yep.
Well, I
Any
hope I did a good job presenting the theory.
Now that was this was really interesting stuff. Yeah, I look forward to, and I think it's worthy of more, pursuit. I'd like to discuss it further. Folks can think about it. And I'm sure a lot of the secondary contributors will be in the comments section.
Yes, I would love
We
to
have,
hear other people's thoughts on this
yeah,
topic.
other people. Yeah, maybe I'll pin a comment. I'm like, weigh in on the thesis. But there's a lot to unpack. I mean, it's not strictly a biological thing, but it may have started that way, and then, like I said, the whole, social media situation sort of threw gasoline on the proverbial fire, and that's what
Yeah,
got us to
totally.
where we're
Like,
at.
what would it look like if the bird species that was being cucked essentially had social media? Would they be
Yeah,
like, "Oh my God, look at my baby," and it's like
you look at
clearly
my
this
baby.
gigantic bird that's not the same species?
It's
You know
like,
what I
yeah,
mean?
it's like, yeah, it doesn't really look like you at all.
How dare you?
That's funny. Anyway, I'm going to
All
wrap
right,
it up,
guys.
folks. So, anyway, yeah, this is Animal on Control. And as always, people first. Thanks, folks. Great talking to you.
Bye.
Yep. Talk
Bye.
to you later. Yep. See you around the Discord. Bye.